Hello, kia ora everyone. Welcome back to Tech Engineering Lounge. This is season 1, episode 3. We're talking about quality engineering today. I'm Camy your show host, and along with me, I've got James S. So before we kick into talking about quality engineering, I just wanted to thank everyone for watching our content. So we've been live for like 3 weeks now, and we already have 389 views across all of our videos. We have 41 subscribers, which is amazing because we've only been live for 3 weeks. And I wanted to give a big shout out to one of your mates, Richard Lopez. He watched all of our videos and he left really good comments on some of our videos. So thank you, Richard, for watching our content. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
Cool. So let's talk about what is quality engineering today. And how can you build a quality engineering culture within your team and in your organization? James, do you have a definition or just like a rough explanation? If someone would ask you what is quality engineering, what would you say?
I don't know that I have a definition. The term quality engineering, I think, is quite new, and it refers to people who are doing a role that's traditionally been called tester or QA, which could stand for a variety of things. And for me, that, those titles are actually okay, but the word quality engineering sort of implies that, you're the people who are focused on quality in your team are part of the engineering team, and that quality is not something that's disparate from engineering, building the product. The quality aspect, the testing, whatever you want to call it, comes under that umbrella and is part of it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So quality engineering has only come into focus for maybe like the last couple of years, since we've seen a massive rise in DevOps. And I think DevOps is what has brought like the entire thing about engineering, software engineering in general, and quality engineering into the mainstream. It is definitely a discipline of software engineering. Like there is no argument over there.
Yeah. I think this idea that, DevOps is developers are responsible for their own ops, right? You own a piece of software and you own it all the way through to production and monitoring and everything onwards. And quality just kind of fits under that umbrella. There's no more of this, when I started in the industry, I can clearly remember, the phrase "not my job," coming from engineers, because they'd cut a piece of code, it met requirements or acceptance criteria, and it was off the testing, and they never saw it again. And that's certainly something that's gone the way of the dodo. Engineering doesn't work that way anymore.
Exactly. Quality is not an afterthought. And I think that's what quality engineering is about. Like, how do you bake quality into your products? Like for me, it starts right when you start talking about a feature. Like you start adding stories into your backlog. That's when you actually start talking about quality. Talking about like what is a proper definition of quality engineering, I spent quite a lot of time looking it up, read like several blogs. It was very confusing. So after reading everything, I decided to write my own definition of like whatever makes sense to me. So prescriptive definition. So use your discernment. So the way I would define quality engineering is it is a set of practices, principles, and processes that enables a team or an organization to deliver a high quality software to their customers at a higher velocity. That's it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so then, I like that is about the team. It's not about an individual. And I'm curious, how does do you have a role that is a quality engineer, or does everyone own that, and you don't have that specialist?
That's it. So nowadays, I think there are quality engineering roles. Like people do hire specifically quality engineering. For a quality engineer, I have been to interviews, and I don't know if this has been your experience as well. I've been to interviews where like the hiring managers will say to me, we're not just hiring an tester, we are hiring a test engineer. And It wasn't until like very recently I started thinking about it. And I wish I had the guts, like when I was actually applying for interviews and when I was told this, I should have asked the manager, like, what's the difference? What's the difference between a tester and a quality engineer or test engineer from your point of view? What is like, when you say you're not hiring a tester, you're hiring a test engineer, what extra do you want in a test engineer?
Or what less?
Or less.
You raise an interesting, and both of us have quality backgrounds, right? Like, we've come out of, being QAs or testers or test engineers, whatever you want to call it. And one thing that the testing industry as a whole does very badly is defining what terms mean. Test engineer or quality engineer means something completely different to different people. Even words like, we interviewed someone the other day who talked about the difference between bugs and defects, which I'd never heard before, and I'm not sure I agree with, frankly. But to them, those were two different things, and it's something that really sticks out as that I feel sort of engineering coding has kind of sorted better than the quality side of things do. There's a lot of churn and disagreement about the definition of different terms. And we talk quality engineering, it's kind of like, well, we have to spell out what we mean by that, right?
Exactly. And if you go online, there is a massive debate around like how is quality assurance different from quality engineering, and a lot of thought leaders in the quality space are kind of like saying that quality engineering is not quality assurance. I don't know if I like wholeheartedly agree with that. I definitely see quality assurance as a subset. Like quality engineering for me is the umbrella, and quality assurance is one of the things that falls under it. So it is debatable. Like, what are your thoughts about it?
Let's debate it.
Yes.
I like is and I know that they can be a little bit controversial, but I like the rapid software testing school of thought on this stuff. That quality, we can't assure quality, right? No one can assure quality. It's not like I do the testing, the quality's there now. That just doesn't happen. So it's very much a misguided term to me, and I think we do best to sort of distance ourselves from the term quality assurance. And kind of I hinted at before that people have started calling QA or quality assistant or quality analyst or quality advocate, which is all fine, but and that's part of the reason actually we call our team quality engineering, just to distance ourselves from that quality assurance label, because it can reinforce that belief that we'll give it the testing and they'll put the quality in, and that's not how the world works anymore. Well, it never worked that way, but we've just kind of learned that it doesn't. Yeah,
exactly. I think I agree with you. So moving on to how do you build a quality engineering culture in your time or at your organization? For me, I have three major categories, which I would like to call the three pillars on which you would build a quality engineering culture. So number one in my list is continuous testing. Number two is a data-driven test architecture, and we're talking about metrics and stuff over here. And number three is the developer and tester experience. And this is where we talk about toolings and frameworks and what all like your principles and your processes and stuff. So let's talk about continuous testing. Like, this is something that I'm kind of like really keen to talk about. And to talk about continuous testing, I think we should probably talk about continuous delivery and continuous integration. Because a lot of people talk about DevOps, but the reason DevOps doesn't work, or you might be doing DevOps, you might have continuous integration, but the reason you cannot continuously deliver your application to production to your customers is because you do not have continuous testing. Does that make sense?
Maybe it'll help to spell out an example that I've come across where there's a company, and this happens kind of a little bit, where they're like, we ship to production every week. And we ship to production every week because we get our build done, then we give the testing, and they spend 3 days regression testing. And, the next week they spend the next 3 weeks, another 3 days regression testing, and it just repeats and cycles over and over. And actually, you could have really good CI/CD, but because you've got that blocker of, people spending all this time regression testing, it's useless. And so you need to pull that big chunk of it out, which becomes uncomfortable for people, because then you sort of go, okay, well, let's release something and not regression test it, and that can be unfamiliar and frightening. But actually, if you have good CI/CD, imagine you take 3 days to do a regression test, or you take 15 minutes to roll back a bug. That 15 minutes is going to be much more preferable to spending all that time doing that regression testing. But that can be a hard pill to swallow, and it's not always appropriate. But I think a lot of cases it is.
Exactly. And when I say continuous testing, for me, the majority of that continuous testing is where automation comes into picture, and test automation does the heavy lifting, right? So the only way our developers or our teams can consistently integrate into the master branch, and then that master can be shipped to production to our customers, is when we have those automated suites, all of those automated quality gates into place, right? So a lot of people, and this is where I was saying, a lot of people say they do DevOps, or maybe they might be doing like you're saying, like weekly releases or fortnightly releases, but then they are spending at least 30 to 40% of their weekly resources on doing manual testing. For me, that's not DevOps, that's not CI/CD, that's not continuous testing. You have to have some sort of, and because this is what automation is good for, right? Like people always think like automation is like such a big thing, but automation is you use automation when you have repetitive tasks, right? And if you're repeating your manual testing every week, even if you're doing releases every week, but if you're doing 3 days of manual regression, that's where you can write code. You can convert a lot of your tests into code that can then be run and replace all of that manual testing. And this is why I want to talk about continuous testing.
Yeah, and the great thing about that is, and now there's kind of a nirvana here, because how do you get from that place where you don't have any automation to you've got lots of really good automation? There's a big jump there.
Yes.
But once you've achieved that, or you're on your way to achieving that, as a quality engineer, you've got all this time to do other more interesting stuff. I'm not sure I buy into the phrase manual testing, but it's testing, right? So you've gone, okay, here are the things we can automate. Let's put those there. Those test out, the things we know about. Now I can play with some things we don't know about and do some exploring and all that really interesting, juicy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did you wanted to talk about DORA metrics as well? Like give us a quick overview of what DORA metrics are as part of this conversation.
I kind of, yes, real quickly, because this is kind of, it's a quality thing. And like people see, DORA metrics, the DO stands for DevOps, the eyes glaze over, go Google, do your thing.
Yeah.
But it's a quality metric, right? How often we deploy greatly affects quality. How often it takes to make a change, how often it takes to recover from an incident is another measure of quality. And so these are things that as quality we should be, focusing on to make our product better. That might mean, okay, I get comfortable with not doing as much regression testing, but I work with our, SRE team, our ops team, to get our time to deploy down. That's going to be have a bigger impact on the quality of our product, because now, we have a way of better managing incidents, if we can get more automation in place so that we have less failures.
Exactly.
So again, I don't want to, I could take up our whole time talking about DORA metrics, but DORA metrics, DORA, look them up.
Yep.
Start focusing on those, and this should be coming from the high up in your engineering team.
Exactly.
It's not. What am I trying to say here? It's something quality engineers should be concerned with.
Yes.
But everyone who has a vested interest in the quality of the product should be across this stuff too.
Should be interested in. Exactly. And metrics are a big part of like the entire DevOps culture, right? Like when we talk about DevOps, measuring ourselves, measuring everything we do is really, really important. So while we're talking about continuous testing, one of the other things that I had in my list was what, when, and where. And what I mean by that is what test to run, where to run that, and like where to run those tests, like where exactly in your pipeline should these tests run, and then when to run these tests. Do you run these particular tests at every PR that is being trying to merge to master, or do you just run them like once you've merged to master, then you want to run these tests that actually run against an actual test environment overnight, or only before you do a release. So what, when, and where, that's a very important part when we say quality engineering. Like for me, that really, really matters.
And I think gaining experience to know what to run where as well.
Exactly. Yep.
Let's run our unit tests all the time. Let's run some regression tests in a staging environment. What tests will we run in production, and how often should we run them?
Exactly.
That's something that really interests me. I know I'm pretty sure that if I remember rightly, the vendor don't have any sort of test or staging environment. They only test in production, which terrifies me.
It terrifies me. Me too.
But, it also it clearly works, right? They're a really successful company. So, yeah.
Again, it depends, right? Like in banking, you probably can't do that. Like, I mean, we use feature flags, but if feature flags for me are like the last resort, like we shouldn't have to switch on and off feature flags to hide bugs in production. A lot of people in general in technology understand that that's what feature flags are. I mean, of course, feature flags has so many things, but a lot of people think like if something goes wrong in production, we'll just flick it off. And I'm like, that's the wrong attitude. That's not why we use feature flags. Like we should have enough quality guides. We should be building enough quality guides, embedding enough quality guides in a pipeline so that we don't have these issues. That's the last resort.
Feature flags are a safety net, right? Like worst comes to worst, yes, we can do that. But what you're building matters. If you are I don't even know if this is possible, but say you are building flight navigation software, you can't just go whoosh to flag it off while a plane's in the air, right? That's not going to fly. So context matters there too.
Yeah, exactly. I think we'll probably do like another episode or segment just dedicated to feature flags, because feature flags is again quite a controversial. Like people get like there are such really good debates around feature flags. Like, and a lot of people use feature flags for everything, and a lot of people are like, no, that's not how you use feature flags for software development, because otherwise you end up with like so many feature flags. Like you've actually got a technical debt, just like 20% now dedicated to cleaning feature flags.
There's heaps of yes. We're implementing something around that at the moment. So, good timing.
We'll good timing,
Yeah.
Nice. The other thing was TDD versus BDD. So a lot of people, I think, argue whether we should write TDD test or we should write BDD test. And I'm like, write both. Because TDD,
It's an unfortunate coincidence they both end in DD because people think, they're opposites, or they're two sides of the same coin, but they're just two different things.
Exactly. They're two different things, and you should be writing both. And this is where the test pyramid really comes into picture, right? So TDD is test-driven development, which is what unit tests are, where you're testing things in isolation. And BDD is behavior-driven development, when you are actually testing something from a customer's point of view. So for me personally, anything that's above the unit test in the testing pyramid is all BDD. Like for me, that's all BDD. And then, like for me, an ideal testing strategy should have both TDD and BDD. Like that's how I approach things.
My interpretation is different.
Yep.
And I say that because these are development approaches, right? Test-driven development. So we develop test first, and then we develop the code.
We develop the code. Yep.
So like you're saying, unit test before you actually write any code, and then you write the code until the unit test passes.
Yes, exactly. That's what TDD is. The other definition of TDD.
Yeah, and then BD is, instead we're looking at user behavior for the way we do our development. So, you write out, traditionally given when thens, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm kind of, I don't know, BDD is not my favorite. Like you see things like, is it cucumber? Is that the syntax where you sort of, people lay it out on top of your test?
Yeah. Have you noticed this trend? Like the given when then kind of like is going out of fashion. Like I think like I have definitely noticed a shift towards journey test of like more and more teams and organizations are focusing on like maybe integration tests, which is like the middle layer just above unit test, and then journey tests are the one that sit at the tip of your pyramid, which is kind of like very small number of tests. So integration test is like where the majority of your bulk of your testing pyramid or your testing strategy is going in. And then there are journey tests, and people are moving away from using given when then, because at some stage it adds extra complexity. I have noticed that people are moving, not right now, but a few years back, people were starting to move to more like scenario, like one line scenario instead of using given, when, then. Nowadays, as more and more testers are learning how to code, as more and more people can read code in general, the test name are descriptive enough that you don't need even scenario or anything in English. This
is the thing. Yeah. If the code is, if you write nice, readable code,
exactly.
You don't need that layer of given when thens on top of it.
Exactly.
I 100% agree.
Me too. I wholeheartedly agree with that approach. It's just like as we become, and again, it's a maturity model, right? Like as more and more people learn to code, as more and more people learn to move to that model where you can use best practices for your coding conventions, you do not need given when then and that scenario lingo. That's just like extra, like wrapper. It's like, for me, there's just a wrapper on top of your test that you don't necessarily need if your test names are descriptive.
Yeah. As always, though, context applies. And,
exactly.
There's bound to be someone who's maybe, Goiko Ads is just one of my favorite writers and presenters, and he's big on BDD and talks about these situations where it works really well. And I'm like, it must work somewhere. But
Have you used Cypress?
Yes.
Cypress, you know how Cypress actually kind of like when you use it, you have to kind of like put a few words in English. I think that's quite nice. Like just like 4 or 5 words, like what is this test doing? I think that's good. Like Cypress actually forces you to do it. Like other test frameworks don't necessarily force you to do it unless you're using like Cucumber and all of those other frameworks.
And the key is to make that readable so that when the tests run, you can see what it's doing.
Exactly. And reporting looks quite nice as well. Like when you're looking at reports, like something filed in your pipeline, instead of kind of like checking out code and reading through the code, you can just kind of like tell from your test name. But again, if you write your test name descriptive enough, you can tell that from your test name as well. Moving on, data-driven test architecture. That is the second pillar that I have got in building a quality engineering culture. And when I say data-driven test architecture, the reason I now have a big focus in data-driven test architecture is because every team and every organization that I have been to, people always question the return on investment on test automation. And obviously, like a lot of these people that question it are kind of like, they don't clearly understand DevOps and, like CI/CD and all of that stuff, and how integral automation testing is to building a culture of DevOps. So for me, I have metrics, because once you have metrics, you can measure yourself and you can show those stats to people. And like for me, that gives me food. Like, here is your return on investment. Like, here are the metrics. So I now have a big focus. Like every organization I work at, I have a big focus on putting in some sort of metrics. What are your views on it?
Well, because I haven't done it right. I haven't used metrics and test automation very much. Like short of things like the DORA metrics, where we've gone, okay, we had an incident, but it took us 15 minutes to roll back the code. Those are the kind of metrics I've been looking at. But things like, measuring the number of, like, I'd be really interested, how long a test suite takes to run versus how many bugs it finds. Like, and what's interesting to me too, and it's, how do you make a metric out of it? But what I want to know is, like, if our automation finds a bug, what's the what's the consequence of that? Did it find something that was actually, going to be a real risk or devalue, for the company? Is it worth the time we put into it? Because you really only want, to my mind, those automated tests running on the things that really matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Because the other thing is the feedback time, right? Because the feedback time really matters. So, for example, where I work right now at Bank of New Zealand, we have like 25 developers working on like one application, and we are all shipping code to production every week. And like every developer probably, and even testers, right? Like everyone writes a code nowadays. So any team could have like 5 to 6 PRs, and they all want it to merge to master. And if every team, and if you're running like 100 end-to-end tests as part of just like trying to merge a feature branch into master, and everyone has to wait for like 2 hours at least, you're clogging up the resources, and then that 2 hours ends up kind of like your PR is in a queue, and now you're looking for like another it just becomes very clunky and very heavy, and the feedback loops becomes massive. So one of the things that we did was at one of the teams that I used to was actually BNZ. When I was in BNZ last time, I was in a platform time, and some of the metrics that we introduced was the number of flaky tests. So anytime we had retries. So in our pipeline, we had retries. So every failed test would be retried 3 to 4 times. And if it still fails, we would publish that particular test. And then that test would be assigned to a time, and they would have to look at it. And it was kind of like naming and shaming and giving people responsibility, because before that, no one was even looking, and people were like, automation doesn't work. Tests are always failing. But the point is, like, if we've retried a test 3 to 4 times, and if it's still failing, it's very likely to be a bug or really shitty test code.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? I'm really strict on, like, I know Cypress have sort of implemented this flaky test thing, right? Where it will tell you how flaky your tests are.
How flaky your tests are,
like, to my mind, as soon as it starts being flaky, turn it off, find out why.
Yeah.
And either turn it back on again or get rid of the test. But you introduce so much risk to your system by having flaky tests.
Yeah.
And I've been there, right? I've seen engineers who have a test suite that, things come up red. Or they go, well, that fails all the time. So it just gets ignored, and then you run into problems.
Yep. Yeah. For me, because my experience is mostly on large scale applications, right? So where you have 10 teams contributing to the same repository or same code base, how do you put controls in place so that people are not adding flaky tests? And sometimes you can't even you can't, maybe it passed on their PR run, and then they merged it, and then overnight it fails, and now it's stopping the release. So this is where we actually introduced a flaky test metrics. So we would have nightly run on master, and then that nightly run would produce all the pipeline artifacts, and then it would actually send a Teams notification to our Teams channel, where it would have all of these metrics, like any test that fails will be flagged out. And hi, this is actually impacting the release, so you need to go have a look at it. The other problem we had, and pretty much every organization have, is test proliferation. In spite of the testing pyramid and the testing community talking about testing pyramid for decades, every organization goes through that problem, right? Test proliferation. So for us, we also started publishing the number of tests that we have, especially the end-to-end tests, because we were like, this is our, let's say 50, we cannot have more than 50 end-to-end tests, 50 journey tests. So anytime this goes above 50, we want to flag it out. So that was one of the other metrics that we were trying to flag. And again, in a large scale team where you have 35 to 40 people contributing to the same code base, you cannot stop people from merging code unless you're proactively introducing automated processes or guides before even people try to merge to master, which doesn't always happen in mature organizations. So this is why my team at that time was trying to flag all of these things in the nightly build so that we can bring it to people's awareness that, hi, our tests are proliferating, our flaky tests are going up. And we would also record the pipeline time, like the entire duration of the pipeline. So on a successful, our baseline standard for a successful build for an iOS application, let's say, is 90 minutes. Now, if you have flaky tests, if you have bugs, it will go up to like 2 hours or 3 hours. So we were also publishing that. And that was actually quite good. I think introducing that test metrics, that actually helped the entire team and the entire platform to be able to mature.
Yeah. I think in that context, that's obviously the right thing to do, right? Like that's having that many people moving to the same thing is
exactly
chaotic enough anyway.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned. I'm interested in test coverage and how. Do you find that useful?
We did. We did. So test coverage, I think test coverage for BDD test is always hard to nail down, because when people say test coverage, I think traditionally the test coverage is for unit tests, where you can actually measure the lines of source code that are actually being covered by a unit test, right? But when you talk about BDD, the behavior driven test, journey test, it's quite a hard problem to solve. So one of the ways that we tried solving the coverage problem for BDD test in one of my teams was we came up with a journey map. So for a banking application, there's we know there are 30 features. So we created a userflow.md file, and we wanted this file to be version controlled and version managed. And every time someone adds a new journey test, we wanted eyes across it. So we created a userflow file, and that userflow file had 100 tests in it maybe. And then we went out to the other teams and we said that we can only implement these 100 tests because because this helps us with containing test proliferation. And we now, we also all of those 100 user flows were categorized into features, and all of those features were provided priority. If it's a payment, it's a transfer, it's a P1 feature. And you should have 100% coverage across a payment and transfer feature. So we were trying to solve a lot of problems using that approach, which was really good. And then what we did was we actually implemented a Ruby script. And what the Ruby script would do, it would type the user flow. And then there was a mapping file that we created. We call it a mapping YAML. And what the mapping YAML would do, we would have a user flow linked to a test9. That's pretty much that was in the mapping file. And then our script would we would provide the location of our test cases, of our mapping file, and of our user flow file. And then the script would check, it would start from object one, and it would check, does the test name exist? Does the user flow exist? If it exists, it's a match. And then it would calculate all sorts of coverage. Once we had that basic thing in place, we could do so much with it. And I mean, it still works.
Is that quite a lot to get going?
It took me and another tester and a little bit of help from developer, a couple of weeks to do. But yes, but the thing is, we solved so many problems because using that user flow file, then we contained the test proliferation problem. We don't have a test proliferation problem anymore. And also because the user flow file, everyone, it sits in Git, everyone has eyes across it. And every time someone adds a new user flow, so you have to create a PR. You cannot just add a test. You have to create a PR. And it also gave us a really good idea across our features. And the coverage is always relative to our KPIs and to the priority of the feature. And I truly believe that we should never focus on building 100% automation coverage for any application. It doesn't work. It's an anti-pattern that I want to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand. I mean, I've only talked about coverage in terms of unit tests, but I feel the same. 100% coverage is it's not helpful.
Yeah.
There are things that are not adding value. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
We've just tipped over 30-minute mark. So we should quickly talk about developer and tester experience. That's the third pillar that we should focus when we are trying to build a quality engineering culture. Because when we talk about continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous testing, we want to be using frameworks. We want to be using programming languages that are not only developer friendly, but also tester friendly. And we all should be looking at what is the upskilling curve? What is the learning curve? If you were to introduce this particular, if you were to introduce Cypress, and this is why I think Cypress is so famous right now. Everyone uses Cypress now because Cypress is so easy. I mean, of course, it's a new age web test automation framework, but their documentation is so amazing. Like, oh my gosh, it's just like, once you use Cypress, you don't want to use anything else.
It's interesting. So a lot of people told me that Playwright is better than Cypress.
I have heard about Playwright. This is one of my, I have to explore Playwright. It's my to-do task.
For me is that I tried to explore Playwright. The documentation on Cypress was so much better.
Yeah.
And it might be different now. That was a couple of years ago, but it was obvious that for what I was doing, Cypress was going to be the one. So it's interesting you say that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, and also like when you're building a test strategy, like it also has to be scalable and sustainable. And this is where I have a big focus on avoiding anti-patterns. And when I say some of the anti-patterns are large number of flaky tests, which we've already talked about. And if you start publishing those flaky tests, like if you add them as a metric, if you start doing what my old team was doing, publish them as a metric, one of your pipeline metrics, I think that's an anti-pattern that you can avoid. Testing pyramid inverted. A lot of teams still have like very large manual regression, which we talked about when we kicked off this segment. You might be doing on-demand releases, or you might be delivering your product to market every week, but it takes you like 2 days of manual regression. That's like, that's not good enough. And if you don't have any metrics, like I think adding metrics is definitely like more of a maturity model again. Once you've got a solid test automation, you've got CI/CD, DevOps, and all of that stuff going, then introducing metrics on your platforms, on your pipelines is a really good way to make sure you're avoiding anti-patterns. Also, shifting testing left. Let's quickly talk about that before we wrap it up, because I think I actually had a conversation in one of our test chapters last month where people were questioning, like, what is shifting testing left? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, look, and not everyone realizes this. It's sort of, you're talking about, I'm going to make sure on the right side of the screen here, the left to right development process. So, you have the design and the product analysis, and then you have the building of it, and then traditionally you have sort of testing and releasing.
Yeah.
And what shift left means is that the testing part moves over here, so that you're testing as you're doing the designs, and you're testing as you're doing the discovery, you're testing as you're doing the product analysis, and you're testing as you do the development. And what it means practically is that, you need to be if you've got a test specialist in your team, then to be part of those conversations early. And that's, I find, can be a hard thing for traditional teams to sort of grok, is that we need to talk to that person now, even though they might be asking us hard questions or, object to what we're doing, but we need that objection now, not when we've already built the feature. Because it's going to course correct us a whole lot sooner.
Exactly. For me, shifting, and this is what I said to the testers in my team, shifting testing left for me doesn't mean that you need to write test automation or BDD test for every story that you're working in. Shifting testing left means that you start asking questions about the quality or how to write these automation tests, or do we even need to write the automation test as soon as that story is brought into the sprint. That's what shifting testing left is. And not everything needs to shift left. Like for me, master is like anything left of master is shift left. Anything that moves to right between master and release, for me, that's right, shift right. And a lot of things do need to shift right? Like there are a few checks, like sonar checks and stuff, that you cannot run on every PR. You cannot do that. Like it's too expensive. Like it's going to increase the feedback time to your developer, and it's going to take an hour longer for a developer or for our testers to merge the PR to master. So maybe you want to shift those checks right. Like you can run those tests after you've merged your PR to your master. Yeah.
So like part of your CI/CD flow, they come still.
Exactly. Yeah.
To me, conceptually spreading or shifting right, it's sort of, actually testing happens after we've released the software as well.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah. Oh, testing in production, right? Like you should always test in production. We should do a segment on testing on production. Like it definitely deserves its own segment. And how best. My
friend Richard Lopez is big on testing in production. I'll see if he'll come and.
We should get Richard. Richard on then.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we've just gone over 40 minutes. Do you have a trick question? We've moved on to trick question segment for the day. Do you have a trick question for me?
Well, I don't know if I have a trick question. I'm doing interviews. I have an interview question. for you if you like.
Sure.
Because I've been interviewing testers, this is a testing question. Camy, when have you finished testing?
When have I finished testing? I think I've finished testing once the feature has been deployed to production and it's been verified that it works in production. That's when I think, like for me, I finished testing. But again, it's arguable. I think it's arguable.
It's an open-ended question, right? There's not a right answer. Yes. And often, like I find that my answer for that question depends on what I've just been working on.
Yes.
You know, I finished testing because we hit the deadline. You know,
yes.
Sometimes that's the answer. But yeah.
Cool. For listening.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. And thank you, James. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Nice to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye all.